let's move on as to what I call 4 pillars to our athletic performance. And kind of this is where we'll see how we can use the heart rate to improve our fitness. Before we do that, however, we need to understand what are the limiters that limit our performance. And this is where the so-called lactic acidosis comes into play. Our body has a certain acidity level where that we have in a balanced state. As you know, it's slightly alkaline, so-called pH 7, and when that acidity level moves in either of directions of this balanced state, it's not optimal for the body, so that creates additional stress. And when we do a hard session, or in general, when we do a training session, our pH level, the level of acidity, moves into acidic state. And the harder the session, the more acidic state it goes to, which is quite damaging on the body. And during that phase, so-called positively charged hydrogen ions are generated, and that we can feel it from muscles getting, slightly pumped or maybe even painful. So the level of pH decreases, and body will prevent us to go into too of an acidic state. That's why we have all of these limiters. So our body is kind of shutting down from kind of preventing itself from being too overflown with all of that metabolic waste like carbon dioxide and these hydrogen ions and things like that. And one of the indicators of that pH and amount of those hydrogen ions is lactate. So when more hydrogen is produced, body gets more acidic, and as a result, the more lactate is produced. So basically, lactate is the only real measure of intensity of the exercise, and when the intensity gets very high, the lactate starts to grow exponentially, and with that, all of the waste products as well. And as a result, our heart needs to work harder to circulate the blood and deliver oxygen, nutrients to our body and remove carbon dioxide, which means that heart rate increases, and they correlate essentially with that process. And if you ran, 1 or 2 minute intervals at max intensity, you probably know what I'm talking about. So as you start, maybe first 10 seconds, it is okay, but then progressively you feel there's shortness of breath, your maybe arms or legs are starting to get heavy, and then at some point of time you're forced to slow down. So that's an example of the so-called lactic acidosis that is happening. And elite performers, so when we think of people who are training for world championship, Olympic games and things like that, they're trying to maximize every aspect of their performance and use science to tweak their results. And this is covered by an area that's called exercise science. In particular, they might track the VO2 max changes, so the amount of oxygen that our body is using at maximum intensity, lactate, which is as we know now, the indicator of the intensity of the exercise, the blood glucose, which is also an important metrics. They use heat sensors. They use this oxygenation thing. That's where this device that you put typically on your finger, and it tells you how enriched your body is with oxygen. For example, they use it on Everest to see how much oxygen the person has, how oxygenated his body is, and whenever it drops under a certain level, they do specific. They either put him on oxygen or tell him to calm down, because that's an indicator that his body is not processing the carbon dioxide in his body well enough. And if he would go higher, where there is even less oxygen, then he would be he would not be in a good situation. And for example, now Norway is really at the forefront of this science, and in particular the triathletes. They have a few good coaches who really look at all of the data and try to kind of create this recipe that is created, that is tailored for one specific person, and not only try to maximize, the engine of the person, meaning the VO2 max, but also tweak out all of the different factors, kind of how he should, how and when he should consume nutrition, how he should train, how every particular session impacts it, and in order to pace the race correctly and maximize the result. And the result is that the person who is now the Olympic champion, Christian Blumenfeld, he's basically no one can catch him, and they have a few other people who are very close behind. And but this is at the top of the kind of performance. This is the cutting edge science, and not really accessible to us. Testing lactate for a regular person is not really possible. But we have heart rate, and that's the most accessible metrics that we have, and we can use that. There's kind of a lot of resources. There are a lot of benchmarks that we can use to basically improve our performance and lifestyle, and understand how our body works, and kind of, instead of taking years of trial and errors, going out for a hard run and then getting sick maybe a week later, instead of that, figuring out or understanding what are those best practices, and then using them to guide our own training. And from training perspective, the adaptations that we're looking for is first of all, increase the heart size, increase the volume, the stroke volume, so basically the amount of blood that the heart is pushing with every beat, oxygen absorption, that's the level of myoglobin, ability of the body to use fat and first of all, lactate for fuel, because that's lactate is only a byproduct of the reaction, and after we slow down the intensity, after we cannot carry on anymore, our body actually uses that lactate as fuel, and the better sort of lactate tolerance, or the better we are able to use lactate for fuel, the faster we can go at that anaerobic mode. So basically, the longer we can push when our muscles are already getting tighter. Next one is improve fat oxidation, basically using fat for fuel when we train, and then strengthening the muscles, ligaments, and core, and improving the coordination and improving our form. So this is what we're looking for. As you can see, a lot of it comes from the cardiovascular system. And the way, kind of, as I mentioned already, the purpose is not to increase our VO2 max or our engine as much as possible, but rather to optimize our entire body for performance, because we can have a big engine. For example, a person who has a, I don't know, VO2 max of 60 or 70, which is considered almost an elite level, if they wouldn't train for some time, they would not lose, but their other capabilities would decrease. So they wouldn't be able to use that VO2 max anyway. I like to think of it as VO2 max is our engine. It's kind of like a Ferrari, let's say. A big VO2 max is a Ferrari engine. And if we put it in a small Hyundai car that is not designed for that engine, we wouldn't be able to use it, because we wouldn't be able to take a corner at a very high speed, because that car would just, I don't know, turn over, or after some time of using that high engine, the frame would start to disintegrate or something like that. So there are certain pillars that come into our results, and in particular, we start with base fitness, then we build up our capacity on it, then we tweak it towards the rates, and that's when we have the result. And as you can see, we have the base fitness. There are two effects. One is we first need to build the aerobic endurance, and that's where we build mitochondria in the body. Mitochondria in the muscles, and mitochondria, as I already mentioned, they take oxygen and they process it to produce energy. And the process of using oxygen for fuel is virtually limitless. We can go for hours, or sometimes even for days, just on the fat and oxygen alone. That is called low intensity, and it is limited by how many mitochondria we have in our working muscles. Second part of it is the ability of recruiting the muscle fibers, and the more muscle fibers we're able to recruit, the more effective our form will be, so the less energy we would need. Which is why at the beginning of training we need to have two factors. We need to train base endurance, going very slowly, and including some faster or very fast bits in order to stimulate those neuromuscular adaptation. And then as we create that aerobic base, it helps us going forward. So when we have more mitochondria, we're able to process that lactate much better. Not only lactate, but also hydrogen ions, because those hydrogen ions, they are processed through mitochondria. And as we get into a more intense part of the season, the build-up, that's where we need to build actual speed to go faster. We build, first of all, the aerobic capacity, meaning we build those pathways to make sure that our body is able to get the oxygen quicker. And we also build the threshold power, which is the maximum speed that we can maintain while still operating aerobically. After we build that foundation and kind of developed it further, then we start tweaking it towards the race distance, and depending on if we're running a half marathon, or doing an Ironman, for example, then we use specific race specific intensity to grow that further. And that's what's called the pyramid of training. That is for endurance. For speed-related races, it will be slightly different. So there will be much more time spent actually on the power, and it wouldn't be the threshold power, but it would be rather anaerobic one. But the progression is like that because basically that is the most effective way to build fitness. So this is where the four pillars come from. One is intensity, another one is volume, third one is the different training techniques or sessions, and finally